Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our 28th Design Journal. I'm Mark Tassin, your host. I'm going to be talking tonight about Cool Name RPG, the game that we're building to give away to the world. As many of you already know from watching us previously. I got a lot of stuff to talk about, so we're going to get straight into things here tonight. The only sad news is I don't really have any mail call. I mean, granted, I did get a Grand Inquisitor figure, but he's still over there in the box, so I didn't get to show him to you guys tonight. So mail call is going to have to wait this week. Oh, and we're not starting soon. Let me get rid of my starting soon text, since we are now fully and completely operational. So anyway, hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to talk tonight about a few things. We are going to be talking a little bit about how progress has been going on the design work. We're going to be talking about the scariest thing that I have to do for this project. We're also going to be talking a little bit about what's coming for the future of the Design Journal. You probably saw my amazingly clickbaity statement of is this the last Design Journal? You'll find out soon. We'll come back to that one at the end. But in the meantime, let's talk a little bit about where we're at on things. So this week, we sent out links, download links to all of the backers, and that should have been backers both who backed the original project and who have backed since then through the pledge store. They've backed the project since then, and you can get that at coolnamerpg.com. If you don't have it, the link is there. But all of those folks got version 03.03 of the Cool Name RPG playtest core rules. They also got a converted version, just text version, of the Forgotten Gate. It's a World of Aetaltis adventure, which I have handily not next to me. I will grab it and bring it back. See, I've got it here. So, yes, the Forgotten Gate is an adventure that we wrote for the World of Aetaltis. It is a 5th edition adventure, but I took the text for this adventure and completely converted it to Cool Name RPG and shared that with all of the backers so they could have something to play around with. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So let me just start out by sharing a few things with you guys. Let's start by taking a quick look at the core rules and talking a little bit about what's changed from our previous versions of these rules. So let me go ahead and grab a share and I will show you guys what we've got. All right, so version 03.03. We've got change logs now so that whenever we're doing this, we make sure that we're telling you guys what has changed since the last time that you saw it. It makes it a little easier to sort of jump into it if you don't want to go through the whole thing and you're ready to start playing, and lets you sort of focus in on areas. One of the things that happened originally in the original release of these rules was that we had said that when a character reaches vitality 0, they are unconscious. They're incapacitated now. I think this has been changed for most of the rules that you guys are using today, but they're incapacitated. What it means is they can crawl, maybe mutter a few words, with the GM's permission, maybe down a potion or something, but they're otherwise unable to move around, do anything more than really recover that vitality. So they can take a recovery action. But we didn't want them unconscious. That wasn't the intent, that everyone would just be like, out cold, wake up, out cold, wake up. That'd be a bit of a comedy routine, and it wasn't what we were shooting for. We also put a larger version of the action table at the back for you guys. We also, in this one, made a big change. And this is one's going to be controversial for some folks. Some people are going to be like, hooray, this is way better, we love it. And other people are going to be like, why would you do this? But we did go with the GM rolling for NPCs in combat in this one. Now, you guys probably remember, in the previous version, we had player-facing rolls. And by that, I meant that all the combat rolls were made by the players. When the player attacked, they made an attack roll. When the monster attacked the player made a defense roll. We did this repeatedly. This is the way that the system was set up originally. Now, we have a lot of folks who really love a GM rolling system. I happen to be one of them. We're not going to go with what I love most in this, but I also, I do like it. I personally think that it works better. But we're going to find out. It's going to be one of the things when we do our next survey. We're certainly going to ask you guys about that. So give that some thought. But in this one, the player rolls against the defense of the monster when they attack. The monster rolls against the defense of the player when they attack. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Weapons, rather than having a defense score, we switched it to having a parry score because really that's the sort of defense that you're doing. We really have focused in on block, parry, dodge as the 3 types of defense that you can take against an attack. Now, I will say that one interesting thing that's already come up in the play testing is someone said, well, what do you do if a wolf has you pinned down and is trying to bite your neck? Is that a dodge? Is that a parry? Is that a block? That is an excellent question. A grapple? I don't know. We're going to have to figure that one out. That's a great question. That's exactly why we're playtesting this, so that people will ask those sorts of questions. So then next up, let's take a look. We've got lists of armors with scores. I added armors in. I don't know that this is the way that they'll stay, but I want to start playing with this. So I'm going to be putting more and more content out that we're just going to be playing with and tuning and tweaking as we go. All right. So let's see. Clarification, non-lethal damage rules. We clarified those a little bit so that people knew what was what with those. That also is important in terms of weapons because the dagger, for example, doesn't have a damage bonus, but it lets you inflict lethal damage. Normally, fists, punching, kicking, any sort of melee or hand-to-hand combat does not have unarmed combat, I should say, does not inflict fatal damage. You can't kill somebody with unarmed combat. It's always non-lethal, but you could still do a wound. And with vitality, that gets a little bit weird. We're still working that out, but we wanted to clarify that a little bit. Lists of weapons with scores we added in, put in some sample monsters, put in a character sheet, the Forgotten Gate playtest rooms, which are a separate document. I'm sorry I put that in here. It was supposed to not be in this one. Skill and player-facing combat rule modules is the player-facing rule module is out. The skill rule module is coming, so we are bringing that as well. That's the one that uses that gigantic wheel of skills. I'll show you guys which one I'm talking about. You probably remember, but for those of you who haven't seen it previously, it's the big wheel of skills, right? Now, this is mostly for our thinking, but it has to do with how skills are grouped. And this is for a more traditional skill-based system. A lot of folks are interested in that and want to see something more like that rather than the MO system we're using today. But it is easily switched out. And so that module is coming as well. We're still working on that. We were working on that originally because you remember I talked about this before, but I ended up focusing in instead on getting the next version of the core rules out and doing some conversion work. And we'll be talking about that as well as we go along. So skill and player-facing combat rule modules. Also, during playtest character creation, you may choose 1 4 and an additional 3 attribute. So in other words, we dropped one of your 4s because we felt like that was a bit too much. To be fair, I'm not sure 4 is where your first level characters are going to start. I kind of feel like 3 might be where first level characters max out. We'll talk about this some more. It depends on the style of game you want and where you want the focus of the adventure to be. But I do want to think about that a little bit. Going from there, clarification. Each wound adds +1 DS to action checks regardless of severity. The original rules stated that the wound had added a difficulty score equal to the severity of the wound, any untreated wounds. It was a little overly complicated, added a little bit too much of a modifier. And so we're trying it now with just a +1 per wound, regardless of severity. So where does severity come in? Severity comes in for those death checks, and it comes in for the healing checks and the treatment of wounds. That's where the severity becomes very important, but it's less important here is in terms of the difficulty score. It's just +1 per wound. Now, one thing we haven't done is we haven't done wounds for monsters. We really could. And one of the easiest ways is rather than really worrying about whether or not it's a wound, the severity is not that important. But with this change to the system, we could very easily say monster wounds just add +1 to their difficulty scores going forward. It's more bookkeeping. And some people will be perfectly happy with this, but others may not. So that's one of the things that we want to think about a little bit, get people's thoughts and feedback on. Warriors also no longer receive a blanket +1 to their attack and defend rolls. They don't really need them. They already have the focuses and the specializations that allow them to have that to begin with. So we removed that. And then I added some simple 5th edition conversion rules, which we'll talk about. All right. Now there's some wording changes. We clarified a few things here and there. Just to be clear, this text is still a playtest text. It's really designed just to get the rules in front of you so you can use them. It's about testing the rules. It's not really about the way that the rules are presented, but we're always happy to hear feedback from folks. But really, at this point, we're just trying to get the rules to you in the simplest way possible. All right, going on from here, let's scooch past our primary attributes, and we're going to jump past. You see, we're continuing to put art into the book as Russell Marks is creating art for us. We're going to be putting some of that in there for you guys to see. Our MOs are staying the same with your focus and your specializations. That's the same as it was before, so no big change there. And we have our list of MOs, and then we get to combat. And so the beginning of the combat section is roughly the same as it was for player facing. We're looking at rounds and turns. We're not using movement yet. We have a major and a minor action each turn. Again, this is going to be something where we'll talk about whether we want to keep that going or whether we want to change up how many actions you can do in a turn. But for now, we're just doing a flat major minor. Initiative is about the same. Now, I have had some pushback on initiative. There are folks who really, really want your awareness or your intellect, perhaps, to impact your initiative. It's pretty cool, right? Like, what if you had one physical ability, one mental ability, and one intuitive ability? I mean, that's not really a bad idea. It kind of represents the full gamut of your ability to react in a situation. So a character who's got really terrible mental and intuitive abilities, they're going to suffer a little bit. And so you could have someone who's really quick on the draw, but they just don't notice the stuff is happening before it happens. So those reflexes don't help them out in terms of initiative, but it does help them when they're trying to make an attack. We may look at doing that. And I'm interested to hear what people think about that. Should we be looking at spreading out which abilities are being used in which area? So that's one of the things that we've talked about. But it doesn't change. You can still change your initiative by taking your turn. We've got ready and delay actions. And then we get on to character attacks. Now, character attacks have not changed. Again, works just the same way that it did previously. Now, one of the things that we have talked about were defense scores. We have talked to some folks on Discord, and so far there are quite a few people who like the idea of monsters having a certain type of defense. That, I think, is possible. If you start thinking about things like a wolf is going to dodge or grapple, if we add that in somehow, a orc with a sword is going to parry or block with a shield, right? So we might want to do that, but I'm not sure that it's important. That's the thing I'm still not certain about. The key area where it would become important is if weapons have special characteristics that allow them to be better at bypassing certain types of defenses, right? So if that's the case, then some weapons would be better. And at that point, you want the monster to have a very specific type of defense so you can get that benefit when you're attacking them. So that's one of the things that we're going to have to look at and sort of decide, do we want to build that out a little bit more? For me, one of the things that's really difficult is understanding where that balancing point is. Where do you balance the point between too much so that it becomes this overly complex machine that you end up playing the machine more than the game? And where are you just putting in stuff that makes it richer and more fun and a better story? It's really a tough balancing act, and it's one of the things that we're going to be working our way through. Now, I should also note that this rule set has been sent to all of our consulting designers. They're not all going to have time to look at it, but some of them will. I'm sure they won't all like it. And that's one of the things that we want to hear is what is it about it that doesn't work for some people and what works for others? That's going to be really important for us to hear. All right, well, going on. Let's move on to our NPC attacks. So as you can see, the attack for NPCs, they now have an action score and an action die listed. And so, for example, a goblin has a 4, which is a D10. So when they're attacking, they're rolling a D10 to attack the opponent. Now, these numbers are based roughly on this table that we put together. But even more so, it's based on the conversion tools. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that once we get through this here. But yes, they're based on the conversion tools, and they work just like a character attack. They attack the character. The player declares how their character is going to defend, dodge, parry, or block. And then that becomes the target number or the difficulty score for the action check of the monster. So the monster rolls their D10 and tries to get that. Any numbers higher than that counts as damage. Their weapon may have additional damage bonus when they attack, and we've got some of that in there too. So, that's one of the things that we're looking at here is, how much damage score should a monster have? Do we want to split it out by strength? A strength bonus for melee plus a weapon bonus. Do we want to run it that way? Or do we want monsters to be more like a sort of impression of a monster? In other words, the stats on the GM screen side aren't necessarily a reflection of a simulation of a monster, but rather reflective of creating the scene and the action and the combat and the threat that the character should feel as they're playing through this adventure. That's what's really important. All right, so monster attacks work just like player attacks. Not much to say. Let's take a look at weapons. One of the things that's important to me is I want to avoid this whole idea that you have certain weapons that are exactly the same except for like the weight or the price, right? So the price is different. It's like, what? They do the same thing. Why are they different? I'd love to see us incorporate the reason why certain weapons were used in combat and finding a way to do that smoothly and effectively so that it doesn't get in the way of people as people are trying to play the game, but it gives something cool to the game. For example, the broadsword adds 1 difficulty score to attacks. So in other words, it's slightly harder to hit with the broadsword, but it does +3 damage. So what you're doing is taking these huge wide swings, which are easier for your opponent to get out of the way of. And so it's going to increase the difficulty score for you to hit them, but you get a payoff in the extra damage that it does, right? Another example here is a club allows you to do non-lethal damage without a penalty modifier, right? Normally, if I'm using a lethal weapon to do non-lethal damage, there's a penalty involved, right? Well, in this case, there wouldn't be. And again, it's the whole idea that that's why you grab the club, because you want to take somebody down, but you don't necessarily want to take them out. Now, you could if you wanted to, but you don't necessarily want to. Another example is the dagger, where you're doing lethal damage, but it's really not adding much because it's, not adding a huge length. You're not getting a whole lot of a lever action on it. You're not necessarily going to be able to, with a standard knife, parry easily unless it's a parrying dagger, in which case it would probably have a parry bonus, right? But that's the idea there. And then same thing with the armor. The armor here, we're keeping it really simple for now. Light, medium, heavy. Don't want to try to go crazy with this. We're just going to keep it very simple. Down the road, there will probably be rules modules for different types of armor versus different types of attacks, but we're not going there just yet. Also looking at shields. What the shields do is that the shields each have a different effect. A large shield, like a tower shield, gives you +1 armor, and it gives you +1 to your block defense. So that's one of the nice things about that big shield. The medium shield only gives you +1 to armor, but you don't really get a block bonus, right? You're able to block. You get to use block, which if you don't have a shield, you can't really use the block ability. And then the buckler doesn't give you an armor bonus, but it still lets you use block, which might be useful if, say, you're in a really tight situation where you can't use the dodge and your parry isn't an option. So it just creates a very cool way for each of these shields to have a different effect and a different value in the game. Now, while we're talking here, we got a comment from Richard Lee Byers, and I'm just going to share that really quick here. Just talking a little bit. Whoops, I almost added here we go. I'll share this. So here's what he said. He said, awareness and intuition seem like they would affect initiative only when the PC might not know that a fight is about to begin. I think that that's fair, right? And that's exactly why we haven't done it so far. But I will say one of the reasons this came up, and I didn't really remember to talk about this, so I'm glad you brought this up. One of the reasons this came up is a worry that there is far too much weight on coordination. Your coordination impacts your ability to get out of the way of an attack. It impacts your ability to hit your target, and it impacts your initiative. There's some worry that that's too much weight put on one ability. Now, my argument for why it's not too much weight, first off, is that games like 5th edition have been doing this without any trouble for, doing exactly this for quite some time, and the games play all right? We're not really running into a problem with those games. But The other things that I think are important is that I want to see Cool Name RPG have ways for characters to impact combat and impact the outcome of combat in ways that don't involve hitting someone. In other words, I want to see clever characters have ways to trick the opponent into ramming into the wall. I want to see intuitive characters being able to spot the attack before it comes in and get out of the way. I want to see other ways of impacting combat. Maybe it's in just helping your friends to have a better attack. Maybe it's creating a strategy. Characters that aren't necessarily warriors who still get to impact the combat situation. So I'm working on that. We're going to be looking at that some more throughout this process, but we got to look at coordination because it's a fair argument and it's definitely something we want to explore and not wander into without giving it any thought. Okay, so let's get back over here. I have a few more things to show you guys here. Vitality, wounds, and healing, not a lot of change there. Let me just move past this one. I will say that we've been having a lot of fun. I don't know why this is fun, but the whole idea of someone running over and treating somebody's wound in the midst of a battle. It's been a lot of fun because we had a guy who was like taking the front line. He kept getting hit and he fell back and the other characters moved up and the cleric ran up and bandaged the guy's wounds up and sent him back out onto the battlefield. The feel of that was great. We had a really fun time with the vibe of that. And so it really had fun with it. All right, so now let's take a little look at the monsters. So these monsters are out of the basic rules for 5th edition, the ones that they've put out there for people to use. And it's just pretty much a straight conversion. I'm not trying to make these perfect. And we'll talk a little bit about how you convert monsters and things. But I'm just trying to convert them straight over to begin with so we can get a feel for how they work. Do they work well? Are they too powerful? Is it too easy to get away from them? Those are the questions I want to answer, especially with our combat system that allows you to do more damage if you roll higher. Now, arguably, doing more damage when you roll higher really doesn't have a significantly different outcome than having a damage dice that you roll after, because you're still getting a random amount from A to Z that says how much damage you do. We'll see. We'll see how this plays out once we get some of these monsters in here. We picked some of everybody's favorites, rust monsters and mimics and basilisks and goblins and orcs and skeletons and wolves and zombies. Made a few different changes. I changed up the skeleton and zombie just because I've always been bothered by the 5th edition zombies and skeletons that they don't have these two things. For skeletons, I don't want skeletons to be able to take as much damage from a piercing attack. So I want it to be harder to actually damage them with a piercing weapon because it just goes between the bones, right? And then with the zombie, I wanted to play up a little more the idea that you have to attack their head if you really want to be able to do damage against them and take them out, right? So that's part of what I added in there as well. That was just a thing to make me happy as I was putting them in. So you guys will hopefully not mind that little tweak on the old rules. Now let's talk a little bit how I got these numbers. So one of the things that I did, and I'm going to show you this is something that I haven't distributed. I might, if it's something everyone really wants to see and play with, I might add it to the library on Discord. We have a channel where I post all of the documents for people to download. So you've all seen this before, which, well, most of you have probably seen this before, which is these odds of getting certain numbers with certain action scores. This is part of what we went through because we were shooting for a 65% average when you're doing a 6 action score against a 6 difficulty score, because that's sort of the magic number of what feels like fair to people in their minds. 50-50 doesn't feel like 50-50. 65-35 feels like 50-50 in the minds of people while they're playing, which is a fascinating bit of psychology, but we won't go much deeper there. And then also you'll find, I also went through and did a whole thing looking at standard I4 D20 5e odds, right? What are the odds of certain bonuses against certain difficulty scores? It's difficulty classes. Now, one of the things that I looked at here is I also looked at the characters, like what is average? First, I looked at if a character, what is their best stat? What's the bonus for their best stat? And then what's their proficiency bonus? Because in D&D, that's what it all comes down to. It's a pretty basic when you start to strip apart the system, not a lot of variance there. So what you find is that you're looking at about a +5 for a character level 0 to 4, +6, levels 5 to 8, +7, and so forth. You can then compare that to these difficulty classes, and then you can get your average scores and your numbers. By using this, I was able to say, all right, so for a first level D&D character, or first to fourth level D&D character, how hard is it for them to hit a goblin? And then if I said that, if, let's take a look, the goblin in D&D has a +4. So I'm like, all right, so a +4 for a goblin is, well, that's his attack. His armor is 15. So we'll say it's 15 here, right? And the character has a +5, right? Because we know that first to fourth level characters have a +5. In the case of a goblin, it's literally a 50-50 chance to hit. So then all I have to do is go back to our table and find where 50-50 lands. The average first level character is going to have a 6 for their base action score. And 50-50 is about an 8. So now I know what a goblin's defense score should be. Armor class 15 comes out to about an 8. So, as we go through this, that's what I started doing. And I started working my way through the tables, and I ended up coming up with this set of conversion tables for folks to use. Very easy, straightforward stuff where you can take a standard difficulty class, convert it to a difficulty score in Cool Name goes here. Same thing with armor, because you'll notice the armor really just comes straight from this table because that's how armor class works, right? Also talking about armor itself, because in Cool Name RPG, armor reduces the amount of damage. So I wanted to look at that and look at these monsters. So generally, this is where it gets a little more squishy because, to be fair, conversion is more of an art than a science. But looked at this one here and went through, and for certain monsters where it felt like it would be right, say they're wearing armor or something like that, I gave them an armor score, and we'll see how that plays out, how it balances out. I mean, it doesn't have to be a perfect, number for number copy of what's in 5th edition. It just has to be a fun experience to fight these things. So, and then the monster attack bonuses. Looking at those, I was able to then convert what their attack bonuses were over to their monster attack score. So here's what's interesting. I did some analysis, and with the help of a few sites I found, went through and pulled information to figure out what the average character scores were. And one of the ways I did this was pulling the 5e starter set characters out. I pulled them out, and here's what I found. Again, I already mentioned this. Average best stat bonus is +3. Their armor class average is 15. Hit points is 11. +5 to hit. And then damage ranges from 4 to 11 with an average of 8 on each attack. This tells me some interesting things, right? I can now start looking at this and say, look, a CR1 monster has, well, let's go back up a little, quarter. CR quarter monster, right, has about 8 hit points. And so what does this tell me in terms of how much they're getting hit? Well, I can look here and say, well, a CR quarter monster, right? Armor class 13, it's going to get hit 60% of the time. It's got 8 hit points, and the characters are generally doing 8 points of damage. So they're going to generally need to hit it once to kill it, and it'll take 2 swings. In 5th edition, it takes 2 swings to kill a CR 1/4 monster with 8 hit points, and takes you 2 swings to do it, statistically. Now, that's not the way it always works out. You roll 20s some days and things, but all across, it gives you an idea of a system that is already out there. It's been heavily played. We know it's fun to play. We've seen how it works. We know what it feels like, and we can use that to come up with reasonable numbers within Cool Name RPG. And if you'll remember, one of our goals was we wanted to make it easy for people who wanted to take some of their favorite 5e stuff and play it using Cool Name, easily to bring that stuff over. Which brings us to this, the Forgotten Gate, which I brought the Forgotten Gate over. It's a starter adventure. It's not supposed to be deadly and kill everyone. So if it does, you should let me know in Cool Name. That's really not the intent. So as we're going through this, we went through and just page by page went through every single place where there were rules and converted those over to Cool Name rules. So every single climbing roll, every trap, every single thing you find in here has been converted over. Every lock that needs to be picked, we've got the pit traps are all done using Cool Name numbers now instead of using the rules from D&D. We took what sort of damage they do as well. So I'm very eager to hear how this works out for folks. We also went through and converted all the monsters. So there's a doppelganger and a giant centipede and a orc and gray oozes and of course the giant skulk, which if you've never seen the skulk, it's the art by Russell Marks is just love it. Yeah, that thing there, right? That's horrifying. The giant skulk, it's all there and it's available for folks to start playing with. We did the rules module for player facing combat. It says here you basically replace pages 19 to 20 of the core rules with these pages, and you've got player facing combat back. All right. And so that's how that works. So really, folks, that's the gist of it. That's what we've put together. Put in the conversion charts there. There's the character sheet in the back. So we've made a ton of progress. I'm very excited about it. And I told you I'd tell you the most terrifying thing. The single most terrifying thing at this point is sending this stuff over to our consulting designers. These are people who know gaming. They know games. They know what works. They know what doesn't. Even the writing for these, it's nerve-wracking sending it over because even though it says, yeah, this stuff is just playtest, don't worry about it, they still are going to be reading through the stuff that we wrote. Our fingers are crossed that it goes over well and we get some good constructive advice from these folks because we're really eager to hear what they have to say about this at this point. We know it's not going to be for everybody, and some of them are going to read it and go, I would never play this game, but that's okay. How do we make this game awesome for the type of people who would play it? It's nerve-wracking, though. You create something like that, give it to someone who's an expert in their industry, and your heart starts pounding and you get stressed out about it, but we'll see. It's in their hands now. We'll find out as we go along based on who has time to take a look. Now, the last thing I was going to talk about tonight is the big announcement of this being the last design journal. What? Why is it the last design journal? You said you would do these. Well, this is where the clickbait comes in. It's not going to be the last design journal. It's going to be the last time that we do this as a design journal. We often have a lot to talk about, like tonight, about Cool Name RPG, and we're still going to be coming to you here every week to talk about that. But we're going to be rebranding this night as the Mechanical Muse Live. Now, you guys might already know this. Some of you probably are aware that we have a Patreon that if I can figure out what I did with it, I've set it up to share with all of you. Let me bring it up. I must have lost it as I went along here, closed one of my windows. Hang on. My apologies. Boy, everyone's got to wait around while I figure out what I did with my window. So yes, we have a Patreon called Mechanical Muse Magazine that we have set up. We have set this up because we loved the old Dragon magazine and White Wolf and all of the old magazines, Dungeon magazine that were out there. And we wanted to create something like that for today. I know there are others out there, but I kind of feel like I never can get enough of it. So we wanted to do this as well. So Mechanical Muse Magazine is something that we've been working on for a couple of years now and haven't quite found the right niche for it. But with Cool Name, we're sort of hitting our stride. And so the show is now going to be Mechanical Muse Live. It's going to focus on the Cool Name stuff as we go along, but we're also going to talk about World of Ataltis. We're going to be talking about cool games that we've played. We're going to spend a little more time on those sorts of things. So if you have a topic you want to hear us talk about, if you have a game you want us to take a look at, let us know. We're just going to be mixing in some more stuff and basically taking the pages of the magazine and bringing them to the screen so you can see them. And the other thing too is that part of our big push here, and I don't think I mentioned this last time, is that Melanie Metters is taking over as the lead on Mechanical Muse Magazine. I shockingly discovered that I can't do all the things, and I'm so happy that she's doing this. It's going to be awesome. She's going to be jumping in. She already has her first article posted there for you guys to take a look at, a very cool one from the archives of Winterkeep, and I hope that you'll check it out. In the meantime, that is the main news. Again, if you want that, it's patreon.com/mechanicalmuse. And for now, it is for the moment, it is just a electronic, but we are hoping to compile the texts and the content that we create and put it into a magazine form at some point and print it, probably the same format as the Forgotten Gate here. Well, you can get it on Drive-Thru RPG, but we'll make it available to folks through the Patreon as well. And we're really looking forward to that. We're looking forward to putting some more fiction in there as well. And it just should be a lot of fun and a great way for us to put things out into the world that we think gamers will want to take a look at and see. So I've done a lot of talking. I think I'm going to call it good for tonight. Thank you all. I hopefully will see you here next week for Mechanical Muse Live #1 as we bid adieu to the Design Journal and say hello to Mechanical Muse Magazine. Design Journal is dead. Long live Mechanical Muse Live. Take care, everyone. Hope you have a great night and a great weekend.